So this is the April 6th, 2021 Finance Subcommittee of the School Committee. We are going to start by reviewing and approving the minutes of March 11th, 2021. Can I get a motion?
Sure.
Thank you, Susan. Second?
Second.
Thank you, David. Susan?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
And I vote yes. That's great. The next item on the agenda is acceptance of gifts and grants. Why don't we do a motion, and then if there's any discussion, we can go on to that. Can I get a motion to accept and approve? Thank you, Susan.
Second.
Thank you, David, for the second. Okay, any discussion on any of those? Do you want to take a moment to review them? Anything? No? Okay. Susan?
Yes.
David?
Yes.
And I vote yes as well. Okay. Now we're on to fee increases. Did the memo get distributed on that? Robin, do you know if that went out? I know I saw the draft of it, but I'm not sure if it got just shared.
I thought that I had sent that out. If I didn't, I can do that now. I know I posted it with the materials, but let me see, I can send it to you now.
Did Susan and David, did you get that? No. Okay.
I don't remember saying it.
Mary Ellen, do you want to share your screen and walk through it, or whoever you want to walk through it? Or are you saying, Robin, it's posted on the website too?
Sorry, yes, it is posted on the website, but I can also forward it to you.
Thank you. Do you want to pull it up, Mary Ellen, while you're on mute?
I can pull it up.
Okay.
So it was also in your packet for the meeting on Thursday, because it's also on that agenda.
Okay.
If anybody had a chance to look at that. But.
Okay. I'm going to share my screen. So this is an annual vote the school committee makes to establish fees for the year in our revolving fund programs. And the memo includes a summary of all of the different revolving funds we have and what the projected revenue will be for FY22 as we reopen our buildings. They cover athletics, middle school extramurals, our tuitions, school use of school buildings, high school transportation, BEEP, tuition, school lunch fees, summer school fees for the high school, adult and community ed, performing arts, visual arts, culinary arts are sort of lab fees, and lost books are in Restaurant 108 and academic testing. The other part of the fees, and so the memo includes a lot of responsibilities and requirements of fees and how we collect them and what we do with them and what statutes were authorized. There are general fund fees that are set. Transcripts are a general fund revenue that does not go into a revolving fund or student activities, as it is. We don't actually have a specific budget line item. It's staff that do this on a regular basis for transcripts. Public records requests are also general fund receipts, and Those generally are set by the Secretary of State, those fees, but those become general fund. And then we've been over the last few years working on student activities and getting student activities to be in compliance and have some accounting supports. So we may find that there are other general fund revenue receipts. So those will come to the school committee when we identify those. Our revolving funds in this memo covers, there are no fee increases with the exception of the materials fee. I'll just highlight those that we are going to have increases for. The school committee still needs to vote the fee for the new year. So materials fee annually, we've done a 3% increase for that fee. Those materials fee are those employees of the town that attend our schools that do not live in Brookline. We have international student or CVIS program, or one-year students that come to the district on a one-year CVIS visa, and those we charge our per pupil cost, an estimated amount of our per pupil cost. We don't know how many we will have this year. Typically, we've had 1 or 2 students per year. The use of our buildings, the memo has a link to the fees, which is what the building our operations department charges. We charge off to that facilities account custodians, half of a secretary for billing. And this is where revenue from our extended day, rental of our rooms, the assessment to base would go into this account to fund that extra use of our buildings. And there's no change to those fees at this point this year. The South Brookline bus for our high school students, there's no change to the fee for that for the upcoming year. BEEP tuition, there's a proposal for the BEEP tuition to increase 3%. The increases in the past for the BEEP tuition has been anywhere between 2% and 4%. This year, with the funding structure of BEEP and the early childhood program in the operating budget, 3% will cover our the costs related to typically developing students. School lunch, there's no change in our pricing for school lunch this year. The current fiscal year FY21 school lunch has been significantly supported by federal funds, as the federal government has endorsed and required that all school lunches be free this year, no matter what your income level is. So we've had a significant subsidy this year, and no need for collection. And next year we'll be back to a normal routine. The summer school programs, these are the high school. There's no change for the fee cost for the summer class that will be happening this summer. Adult and community ed is essentially sort of a formulaic, but it's really publication of what their ranges are for their courses. Michelle McGlone has been in front of the finance subcommittee a couple different times, giving you updates around their challenges during a pandemic and virtual versus in-person course offerings. And so they are looking to get back into more in-person sessions this year. Performing arts, these are calculated based on the experience being provided. These generally relate to around the Maya costs of some of the music competitions and the like. In visual arts, you have course fees for photography, ceramics, metals, and sculpture. These are courses that have sort of student and project dependent course material consumption. So those are related to those costs. And career and tech ed for the culinary program, same kind of situation. And then extracurricular activities, we put this formula in there. Costs are calculated for total cost of providing experience divided by the number of students. So there's this per student cost that should be charged. And this is just a general policy that we have the committee vote so that we do not and should not have costs related to the obligation of funding low-income students or other special ed students are the obligation of the district. They are not the obligation of other students. So that is just to keep a policy question, policy statement out there. Lost books is the same in terms of if you lose your copy of Stuart Little, you're going to pay the cost of the replacement cost of that book. And if you find it, we would love to have it back and returned to be reused again. The English language education program may do field trips and the like, but I believe most of these for this summer are not happening this summer. So they've asked for no fee to be replicated. In prior years. It was $50. Restaurant 108, when that reopens, will be sort of price ranges for to students. We're working with them on, in adults, actually it should be adults. Restaurant 108 is considered, needs to be adult attending. If it's open during lunch periods, we're working with them to try to integrate their services with food service so that students can eat anywhere on campus, including Restaurant 108. So that's in discussions in the process of how we can have students access that support. And then academic testing is pre-ACT, PSAT, and AP exams, and what those costs are. Some of those are derived for us, and some are set by the testing facilities. Financial assistance for all fees is in place, and we budget specifically for low-income families, and we distribute those funds when they're needed and identified for those students to the programs that they're participating in. We also have student activity funds, and essentially we've put in a kind of the policy and the formula around how to calculate what a field trip cost is, so that there is sort of general guidance around that, and financial assistance funds also would cover those. And I believe that is the end. I'm going to stop sharing. And I would request the Finance Subcommittee recommend approval of fees to the school committee for their April 8th meeting, so we can establish that as part of our budget for FY22.
Thanks, Mary Ellen. David?
I just have a couple questions about some of the fees. So in terms of international tuition, you mentioned we have about 1 to 2 students a year. Do you think the reason for that low number is in association with the fees that are being charged? If we charge less, would we have more students, or is it limited for some other reason?
It's limited primarily because of the CVIS program. So this is specifically international students that are coming for 1-year exchange. Typically, these are not students that are coming to the high school through other visa channels, but this is a very specific exchange, 1-year exchange program.
Okay, thank you. And then my other questions about testing fees. I see that for pre-ACT and PSAT, it's $20 a test, and for AP exams, it's $95. I'm just wondering why that difference.
So the difference has to do with the cost of the test, as well as the number of proctors and the proctoring process that happens, I believe, is where that difference, and probably also volume. There are fewer students taking the AP exams and a larger number of students taking the pre-ACT and the PSAT, so that your cost of proctors can be divided out among more students.
Thanks. Susan, do you have any questions?
Yeah. So a couple of things was there. A number of these are conversations that we've been having over the years. So I think it would just be helpful to just understand what the current status is. One is the BEEP tuition. Certainly one way to think about BEEP tuition is essentially what our costs are. But I think the other way to think about it is sort of the market. And it's my understanding that the market still is going up. And so in the past, we have, as you've said, Mary Ellen, gone beyond 3%. And I'm not 100% sure why we wouldn't keep going, because I think we decided that instead of doing it in 1 year, there would be a multi-year plan to try to get back to a market level. And so I think we had talked about multiple years above a 3% number, but but I haven't seen the most recent, P&L for BEEP, so I don't know where that thinking landed.
Yeah, I'm looking up to see the report that we have. And we don't have Regina here, who would probably have out a bunch of reports for you, provided one for you. Just trying.
And I guess I'm only asking because there was sort of a fairly extensive discussion about it, like where we
Yep.
wanted to be relative to other providers, how it worked with the revolving fund nature of this, how it worked with the BEEP staffing, especially since there are presumably going to be learning losses in BEEP like there are in other places that they're going to have to deal with. So I think those are just some moving parts on BEEP. It would be helpful to put that in context before voting a tuition increase.
And those could be potentially questions we should have Regina answer on the 8th when this comes to the full committee, because I know that she was prepared to answer that question, and she's not here this evening.
I'm sorry I came in late, but what is the recommendation to do
3%.
for this year?
The 3%,
And
which
parents who have signed up know that already.
no, that's
Well, they were told like subject to a vote. There was some
Yeah.
sort of contingency language that it's subject to a vote, but usually it's around 3%, some wording like that she mentioned.
But 3% was in there. I mean, people knew that.
yes, the amount that's being presented to the committee was the amount that was in, I believe, in the correspondence to the parents.
I'd like
With
to
the-
make sure of that.
That is what Regina
have that
said.
answer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is what Regina said, is that she tells parents, it's subject to the vote of the school committee, but that it's been estimated at 3% or
Okay.
words to that effect.
And so I don't have an opinion as to whether we discussed it at a full committee or not, but just to note that that's probably important to talk about. My second question was around school lunches. I absolutely understand that FY21 was an anomaly, as was FY20 with our food services program. And we sort of had a plan to kind of get that back to solvency in the past. And to the extent that which I think got, sort of blown up in FY20 and completely out the window in 21, but I think it'd be helpful to understand where we are relative to the plan to get food services solvent and whether these school lunch fees will do that for us or whether they won't. I just don't know where that stands.
I'm not sure where that stands either, because one of the biggest questions in the crystal ball that is needed is, once students have been experiencing free lunch and then we go back to no more free lunch, what are the transition issues that we're going to have, and educating students that lunch is no longer free and you have to pay, and how's that all going to work? So I think there's some planning that is still underway with Sasha Palmer, our food service director, as well as she's communicating with other districts. This is sort of a statewide kind of issue for all food services, and so I think there's going to be some group think about transition planning over the summer. Every school district is working on getting students back, so I haven't had an opportunity. Sasha's been straight out, and we've by the way, if anybody knows anybody who's in the restaurant industry and wants to foray into school lunch and school hours, we're hiring. We love to have you. So she's dealing with staffing issues and the like, and kind of the whole, this month of April is all about kids coming back into the buildings and having lunches ready and staffing. So I will pose that question to her. Certainly if she comes back in May and June is still opportunity that if there's a need for a price adjustment or sort of a preview of what next September looks like, that's a good time for food service to do a presentation and a preview for next year. So May and June is a good time for that still to happen while parents are still engaged in the school year.
No, that's helpful because there are so many moving parts to that, which is cost of food and number of lunches that we're going to assume. And Laura, I do appreciate that it's complicated and that she's super busy right now. I guess I'm just trying to figure out what information we can responsibly look at, because we're not going to have the information that you just mentioned, which I totally understand is an important driver, but we're not going to have that till sometime in like November or December to sort of figure out how do we really educate kids about this and how does it work. So I guess I'm trying to think about what is it that we can do now to figure out if this price is in the right ballpark, or if there are any other things. But what I'm hearing you say is that we don't have to vote school lunches tonight, if I'm hearing you right.
I would prefer my preference would be, given sort of the speed at which things keep happening, is that we do vote a school lunch price. So there's one voted, and then if she needs a modification, she comes to the school committee with a modification,
So,
whenever that may be. Leaving it hanging and then having a rush to a vote, and I don't know how this year is ending. I'm just sensitive to we've had a pretty hectic year that food service has not stopped since a year ago March. We've been serving meals all summer, evening meals, like extra meals. So I want to make sure that it's just it is what it is at this point, but I guess I would like to have a meal price voted, and new information will bring a new proposal.
Helen?
so it was my understanding that the federal government was paying for meals since last March, or maybe mid-June. I can't remember when the date was. So we should not have any deficit there, correct?
We actually might break even this year. Yep.
Might, I think.
Might, yes, because even though the federal government is paying for meals, they're not paying 100% of the cost. They're paying a variety. Their reimbursements coming at a number of different. One is you have a state reimbursement, you have a federal reimbursement, and so it's all about managing the dollars.
And that's going to continue until when, that they've said so far?
As far as I know, through the last day of school in June, this June.
Didn't it extend to December 31st, 2021? Like a couple weeks ago? I could have sworn we got something in our email, right? Andy, you're nodding your head that it got extended through the end of the calendar year.
We did. We got an email saying that the federal program was extended until the end of the year.
End of the calendar year, right?
No, I think through June. That was my.
Oh, through June? Okay.
Andy's looking. He's hard at work there.
So let me just put a marker on this one. I don't know if it's a good idea to spend time guessing, but I just put a marker for you, Mariah, to figure out. I'm not sure I feel comfortable voting revenue, but I hear you, Mary Ellen. I just think it's important for us to understand what happened this year, whether we're solvent this year or not, and then what we anticipate, or even just what do we think that we would need to hit? What numbers would we need to hit next year? And do we believe that those are even, reasonable numbers to assume, recognizing that we're not going to know, and that this price is the right, gets us in the right ballpark.
So I want to push back on that a little bit, because we have, like Mary Ellen said, we have no idea what our uptake is going to be like in the fall. Mm-hmm. And like, I'm conscientious about not putting more stress on the staff than is already there. I'm sure you are too, Susan, so I don't mean to imply you're not, but like, I personally would feel comfortable voting these numbers, knowing that no matter what numbers we vote, we will not know whether or not they are adequate. And so we might as well vote something and give Sasha another month or two, or what Mary Ellen thinks, to hopefully get a little bit more information. But part of this is about being able to nail down some of the budget stuff for our ongoing planning.
Okay.
And I personally, I would feel comfortable moving ahead at this point, knowing that it's not perfect, and completely agreeing with you that that we should come back to it.
Okay.
Yeah, and I share your position, Mariah.
Okay. I had a couple other questions. So we've talked about summer program for BHS, and that they might need to be making changes in the program and that those changes were sort of TBD. So I'm kind of wondering about the voting same problem, sort of voting something tonight without completely understanding what the costs of that program are going to be, what the magnitudes are going to be, because again, the BHS summer program this summer might be very, very different, and next summer might be very different from what it's been in the past. And without having a sense of that, it's just hard to know the fee number. If that
Yeah,
makes
so I do want to make sure there's clarity that the fee is related to sort of extra or other typical courses they would provide. Any type of learning recovery, academic recovery, course recovery, credit recovery, we don't charge for, and we shouldn't be charging for. That's something we should be doing in the school year. So yes, there potentially needs to be an update to the committee about the academic recovery, credit recovery, learning recovery piece, but that is not related to this fee. This is really extra advanced level, advanced courses, extra courses, enrichment type of courses, not for
Yep.
credit or the like, if that's helpful.
No, it is. And I think that is what we talked about. Exactly what you just said is what we talked about during curriculum. It's just hard to vote a price without understanding how different this summer is going to be on both of those fronts than it has been in the past.
The health and wellness course is not going to be charged for, right?
You're talking about the extra gym class, basically?
Yeah, that
Yeah.
kids should have gotten during the year.
That was
Mariah?
my understanding. Yes, Dimitri.
Sorry to interrupt. I have the email if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
It was sent to all of us on March 11th. And the food program goes until September 30th, 2021.
Oh,
September 30th?
Yes.
a good month.
Yeah, that's the first month of school. That's
And
your-
maybe extended, I mean, who knows, right? But like,
who knows?
but this is the
I-
whole thing of like, I feel like at any point, I don't feel like at this point we have any data to say that the current dollars that we would be voting are insufficient or sufficient. And that's okay with me
Yeah, well,
at this point.
they weren't sufficient before. I mean, the program has never been solvent. So I think that's part of what I'm trying to understand, which is how far or close are we to solvency, and what would we need to see this coming year for that to become solvent in food services?
So
I'll ask Sasha and Matt to prepare a presentation for late April, early May on food service update for this year, and then looking into next year.
to come to finance?
To come to finance, yes.
Okay.
I still have more questions, but you might want me to stop, Mariah.
How about one more question? Make it count.
So, I mean, so adult ed, we've had a number of discussions about sort of the cost structure there, which I don't want to review here, but do we have a sense of, again, the costs and revenues and what solvency means and looks like for them? I'm similar, I'm just sort of uncomfortable voting a price without understanding what has changed since our last set of conversations with them about their solvency.
So with adult and community ed, there's actually a range that is being presented because every course is sort of priced differently. And I asked Michelle to adjust that range to be, make sure it's inclusive of all costs. So for example, they would charge a registration fee. And I said, why don't you just include that in the fee? Like why you have an extra registration fee, just include that in the course fee. So that you have one fee, for your course, it's $45 or it's $50. It's not $50 plus $7 for registration kind of thing. So she's adjusted that range for that. And then I also believe she also adjusted the range for what the costs are related to their most inexpensive courses and their most expensive courses. So I think because you're voting a range, I feel like she's done her due diligence in adjusting that and gives them flexibility within that range to offer whatever they would like to offer.
Okay, is there a time when we're going to kind of go over the follow-up to their solvency this past year and this coming year?
There should be a follow-up. I also will ask her to come to the finance subcommittee. I think in early May would be a good time for her to give the subcommittee an update on where she is. She should have summer registrations like just released or coming in for the summer program. So I'm sure she'd be happy to come back and provide an update. And we should also have the update from the audit review process that the school committee authorized as well. We should have a report on that as well. So I will ask her to come in early May
Okay.
to do an update.
At the pleasure of this chair, I will see you next time. I will ignore the last four questions on here.
If you have important questions, ask them. Like
No,
definitely.
it's fine. I think I'll just abstain and we'll keep going.
Okay. Can we get a motion for the approval of the fees that are listed in the memo that Mary Ellen provided?
Do you want some? I mean, either the questions are going to come here or they're going to come at the full meeting. So
Go ahead, Helen.
I mean, I sort of agree.
You
with
might as well preview the questions now because, might as well. Go ahead.
Yeah. So athletics went up from 300,000 to 453.
Donna?
Wait. Oh, sorry. I'm looking at the wrong. I just got this memo. I didn't even know it had come out. What are we raising athletics?
No, we're not raising the athletics fee. The athletics fee will need to be raised, but again, we did not raise the fee at this point, and a lot of that has to do with.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
But it will need to be raised in the future. That was part of the preview of Pete for the last couple of years.
And I think we were waiting to hear what because we are the fiduciaries of that, the general fund absorbs any losses there. So we've been absorbing athletics losses for a while, which you brought to us, Mary Ellen. And so just to underscore that's probably something else we need a presentation on, of just where that is. How much are we absorbing of those losses?
The other thing I noticed, Mary Ellen, is that just reminds me is we did vote a K-8 intramurals fund, didn't we?
Yep. So that fee should be on there.
Oh yeah, now I see it right. Oh, okay.
Okay, I went through it. Sorry I interrupted you.
That's okay.
We are going to have budget narratives and financial summaries on OpenGov when we release and open that up. So there will be some financial information available, and we can review that. At least 20, 21, and 22 will be available. Maybe 19, there will actually be a year in there as well. And we'll continue to be providing that going forward for all these revolving funds.
You want me to rattle off the rest of my questions, Mariah?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So one was, we had a good conversation with Mindy about the ELE summer program and how, that we're going to not be charging students, and that it sounded like it was going to be more robust. I would just ask the same question about level of effort and revenue coming in on, or the choice of revenue, and sort of how much that means we are absorbing into the general fund. And if there are, and that one I would ask, is it high enough? Because we know that those students have been disproportionately affected this year. And so I don't know what she's budgeting, but one of the conversations we had in curriculum, just to link them, was if we know that students need far more than what's getting budgeted for, $100,000, few $100,000, and we know that we have, federal money coming in, how do we think about that matching process? So I think there's just a similar question as BHS summer school about the EL summer program.
Other questions?
I'll just do one more, which
Go
was
for it.
on lost books. One of the things that we talked about last time was putting in a fee to account for the fact that there are administrative costs associated with lost books, not just the book itself, but it takes time to do that. So I'm not sure where we landed on that conversation. Someone was going to let us know if what it would look like to add on an administrative fee for lost books. But I'll stop there, Mariah. I do have more, but I'm gonna stop. It's enough.
Okay. Can we get a motion for the increases or the memo, the fees outlined in the memo.
I make a motion?
Thanks. Second,
Second,
David,
yes.
Dimitri,
Yes.
Susan,
Abstain.
and I'll vote yes.
Sorry, one
So-
more. Mariah, were you in the conversation about music, about the music program?
Yes,
So I don't, where's that one?
on the memo.
Yeah, no, where's that stand, that the conversation, where's the solvency of our after-school music program stand relative to this memo and the rentals,
part of-
room rentals and whatnot?
That's base.
That's tied into base.
That's
Okay, just
base.
put that as part of that. Okay.
I'll write that down. Yep. Okay. Next item on the agenda is the FY22 update. Mary or Jim, are you going to start, or Mary Ellen?
I have the slides.
Yeah, why don't I
I'll show the slides.
tee it up a little bit? Yeah, if you'll bring up your slides, Mary Ellen, while the slides are coming up, this is an update on the status of where we are in the development of the FY22 budget. A lot of effort has gone into looking at the accounts, and we will get to that. But I'm going to sort of give an introduction, a little bit of an overview. Mary Ellen will take us through the numbers where they are now, and then I have asked Mariah, who is the excuse me, school committee chair of the subcommittee, the budget subcommittee, and I'll say more about this before I'm asking her to speak to what she's learned, because in her transition into this role, she has done a lot of work in terms of understanding the budget, asking the right questions, and taking a lot of notes, and has organized her thinking around that, which I've asked her to share with this subcommittee. But Mary Ellen, can we begin with the?
Yeah, you should have the
First-
slides up. Are they up?
They're
Okay.
up. Yep, we need to just go to the next page.
All right.
And the next page is one that we always put up because it helps to ground us, if there it is. That basically we talk about the mission of the schools, but primarily the whole purpose of this is we're really about students, and we're really, all decisions that we're making really should be to meet the needs of students across the spectrum. So we want to keep reminding ourselves about why we do this work, and what's the purpose of all of us being here. Okay, so again, it clearly has taken us a while to get to where we are now. We're moving in a much more deliberate way as we get to the finalizing the budget. But clearly, there's been a huge shift in personnel. I mean, this has been an extraordinary year. You've heard me say this before, but I'll say it again here with everybody present, that the Remote Learning Academy is essentially a 9th school created out of whole cloth in very short time. And putting it together was a monumental task. Interestingly enough, taking it apart is a huge task as well. There are personnel issues, there are reassignment issues, and we need to be very deliberate about all of that, which we're moving through. So that's taken us quite a bit. The large pre and post pandemic enrollment changes really have to be addressed, and we'll talk about that in the presentation, where we were anticipating a growth in enrollment, and yet through the pandemic we see a decrease. By the way, it's a state, I think, a national phenomenon with public schools losing enrollment, and we're experiencing it here. But we want to be cautious about it, because is this a one-year blip? Will we actually not see enrollment increases? And what's going to happen next year, particularly with the international students, where we need to be cautious about that. And we are looking at the equity of programs across the buildings, because as we are challenged by budget deficits, we want to be certain that we are really paying attention to the equity of programs for students across the district. And so we spent a significant time on that. And, documentation of every budget request, you'll hear more about that, was an effort to actually justify budget requests as they're coming in, because at first blush, the resources didn't match the needs, even with the decreased enrollment. We'll talk more about that as we go through. And we try to adhere to our goals, adhere to the school committee budget guidelines. Those were very, the school committee, we discussed those early on, and those have been our North Star. We want to minimize reduction in force. We do not want to have a blanket reduction in force. We do not want to do that. We want to minimize that, and I believe we're on our way to that as well. And we want to optimize and extend use of one-time revenues. This is a challenge with the significant difference between need and resources. The one-time revenues are really a blessing, and yet we need to be cognizant of how we use them, thinking in the future. Okay, Mary Ellen. So Mary Ellen's going to take us through the numbers, and then we'll switch over to more of a narrative and then have some discussion. Sorry, Mary Ellen, go ahead.
No problem. Thanks. Thank you, Jim. So the revenue has not changed since our last discussion on March 25th. We've pulled some money off of the SR2 grant to fund tents for this spring. We also have allocations for summer and fall to be determined based on what our needs are. We have a very preliminary number for SR3, which is $3.641 million. We have no outline or final number around the American Rescue Plan. I know that the town administrator's office and the deputy town administrator are still attending a variety of workshops and meetings to try to find out sort of what that final timetable is going to be. The circuit breaker has not changed. That is the funding that we received in fiscal year 21. So we budget that funding, and then typically we do have an increase each year based on the filing. But that is what we budget a known number. And then materials fee, as we discussed with the earlier with the fee, is projected to be with its 3% increase of $520,000. Just to remind everybody, the last adjustment that was made on the town school partnership money was with the GIC, and there have been no other adjustments after that. And the mouse left my.
But our number didn't change with that 152,000.
It changed from 120,045 to 120,197. It's only 152.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see it. Sorry.
Not very much this year.
Okay.
So we've continued giving you sort of all the iterations of our process. The yellow column is where we are today, and we'll be changing, probably could potentially be different on Thursday when it comes to school committee. We've reduced the salaries to 109 million, on the low side of 109 million from, as you can see, the sort of changes that we've been through. It's roughly about a little over a 3% increase from FY21. Contracted services has reduced a little bit. We've scaled back the add back from the school committee's vote. We've gone through the general consulting services line. We've gone through a number of different consulting services lines and have sort of either done a realignment to other where the cost really should be, or we have eliminated the cost or the contract or the need. Supplies, we are continuing to go through. This still does include some increases. It also includes some realignment of some costs related to supplies. Other charges as well. We've moved a lot of the PD that was in general services, the general consulting services line, have been moved to PD accounts, and those are now sitting where they belong. small increase in utilities is for gasoline for athletics, as we will be having more mileage. This line has typically been about $10,000. And then equipment budget, this is primarily all of our computer equipment and leases with the IT department. And we have funded replacement of projectors, done some realignment within this budget, repair and services. But one of the pieces we've done is we've reduced the equipment budget by $50,000 for computers we have yet to purchase, and left that. So that line has been reduced about $50,000. So the school department's portion of the town school partnership funds is $128,054,000. We have at this point removed the salary ask and reduced Charlie Simmons, the public building division's ask to $471 for services and materials. We've been trying to hold that for him. So the net result at the end is we're still working about $382,000 in deficit. And I have some other expense line items I'm reviewing to make sure that we haven't double counted, or that we can pull some funding out of those line items for budget. And I'll hand this back to Jim.
Okay, so you can see from the numbers, a lot of work has been done, but ongoing steps to continuing to work to eliminate that gap. And this is an ongoing process, which we will continue working at. And we're holding our class size to an average of 19 students, as we've talked about repeatedly in the K-8 schools. We're doing that really for a couple of reasons. One is that recovering from the pandemic, a class size of 19 with an average, that's an average of 19. I think the classes may run a couple, maybe 17, a couple, maybe 21, 22. But the average is 19. And there's an ongoing analysis at the high school to identify reductions. You'll hear a little bit about that. In light of the reduced enrollment, we continue to work with principals and coordinators to review all programs for efficiencies and maybe alternative delivery models. And we're looking to review all areas of the school, and you're going to hear a lot about that. All areas of the school department have been and continue to be reviewed. This includes supplies, materials, equipment, and personnel and programs. And we continue to work with the town to identify other funding sources as we move to the end of this process. Mary Ellen? Okay, you see that there are upcoming budget presentations and meetings on the 8th, this Thursday. We'll have this presentation, but a little more complete. On Thursday, more complete meeting that Mary Ellen's going to continue working with her team and with the rest of us around what we still have as a deficit. There's also meetings on April 15th and April 29th. The advisory council presentation is on April 15th.
That's actually April 20th. I just realized it got changed a couple days ago.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
We'll update that before we post it.
Yeah, I forgot that. It is April.
Yeah.
20th. Yep. And the school committee finance subcommittee, May 13th, the town meeting is May 19th. Rapidly approaching us. That's day one anyway. And the budget update is always available on the website. And the OpenGov is the resources, the data is being entered into OpenGov, and that provides very specific and detailed information about all areas of the school department. Okay.
That should.
Okay, so before we have questions, I would like to, I've asked Mariah if she could actually talk a little bit about the work that she has been doing. As I said, she is the school committee's budget subcommittee chair. And she has really asked some thoroughly important questions. She's taken notes and has put together sort of a nice overview of the work that's been going on that I think she can speak to in terms of scrubbing down all areas of the budget. And I do mean all areas of the budget. And she has helped us to think through when requests are made and what's the rationale, what's the backup for the request. How is this affecting us across all of the school committee guidelines and all of the work that's been going on? It has been a thorough experience, and I think it's really worth it, Mariah, if you would take us through some of the things that you've been doing and share with us sort of your insights.
Sure, thanks, Jim. It's been very helpful to be able to sit in and listen to some of these things and hear as the decisions have been made. And so I have been sort of keeping track of what I've been hearing as we've been going along. And I wrote them down, and then I thought it would be valuable, as Jim said, and to share with him and Mary Ellen, and he asked me to share with the group. So I'm just going to pull up. These are the same. This is in the back of the packet that you got by email, but I'll pull it up on the screen so everyone can see. Can you see the document?
Yep.
Okay. So basically, this is just talking about the process, which was what we went through this year was much more of a zero-based budgeting approach. I won't say it was exactly that, but close to that. And really looking at everything that's in there. What is the justification for each element in the budget? And really, how do we respond to what's going on with enrollment, what's going on with student needs, what's going on with our budgetary environment, and sort of triangulating those three things. And some of them are add to the budget, some of them subtract from the budget. And then the other, specifically the thing that's been going on with the budget, as we've all been talking about and just saw on the slides that Mary Ellen presented, was the issue of these large one-time funds, which is wonderful, but they're one-time funds. So how we use that money over multiple years, ideally, to bring the budget back into alignment in a sustainable fashion over that time. One of the things that people have been asking me, and that I've also been curious about, is, why after going through this all, why aren't the expenses significantly down? Because if you think about pre-pandemic enrollment to our next year, in theory, we'll have dropped enrollment by 7%, but the reality of that is just it's not that straightforward of a calculation. So some of the things that are important, I think, to talk about is, one of them is this question of special education enrollment and how that doesn't necessarily track to overall enrollment trends. And so I've asked for a little bit more data on special education enrollment to help make this clear, but I have some of it already. And part of it is that as we look at where our educators are, about 1/3 of the teachers and 2/3 of the paraprofessionals are in the special education, are special educators. And so, that changes what's going on when we think about the enrollment of those students. And if, for example, the number of students in special education remain static, then those costs don't decrease to the same extent. And then the other important thing is to think about the out-of-district placements. So this chart I found really helpful. I've been given some of this information and presented this from the finance coordinator for the Office of Student Services. And this actually shows what we budgeted. So the red is budgeted amounts for that year for out-of-district tuition. And then the lighter red, pink color, is actual expenses. And then the blue is student counts and what we thought were going to be our student counts, and then our actual student counts. And so, for example, you can see year to year, like in FY19, we had budgeted 53 students for 4.5 million, but our actual students who are out of district was 68 for 5.4 million. And in the current year, we thought we were going to have 67 students. We actually have 79. we estimated those costs at the beginning of the year at 6.3, and right now we're at almost 7 million for those costs. So even if you think about, for example, post-pandemic to pre-pandemic, those costs have actually increased by 29% over that time period. So I find that really helpful to understand myself as I'm thinking about what's going on with some of these costs. The other thing that I think is really helpful to understand is this: we talk about the forecast being down and we say, oh, well, this is where we are right now. If you look at this blue dot, this is the current year enrollment as of October. And this is our projected enrollment for the fall, which is based on sort of our more traditional ways of forecasting. However, pre-pandemic, we thought next fall was going to be up here, right? We would have thought we would have gone more or less like this. And so the question is, you know, what is the truth? Are we going to end up down here? Are we going to end up somewhere in the middle? And making sure that we can sustain the education that we are expected to provide, certainly at this number, but also offering, we need to have some sort of flexibility and adaptiveness to be able to respond to the cases in between. And so the staff has done a great job thinking about that. And we talked about this at the last meeting about managing that in the K-8s, and the high school is its own model, but how to make sure we can adapt to that. So that's really important. And then the other thing that's going on is making sure that we're able to respond to the individual and the district-wide needs. So as I said above, and we've all been talking about the additional academic and emotional support needs, but also there's been an issue going on with budget challenges over the past couple of years. So having to, staff having to impose a budget freeze every year. And so we have this cycle where there's been cuts to maintain personnel in the, for example, in the supplies budget, and then the budget gets frozen. And so what does that mean in terms of curriculum coordinators being able to run their programs if they don't have the ability to purchase the materials throughout the year? So part of what we've been thinking about as we develop this year, and why isn't it necessarily cutting, is trying to break that cycle of cut, freeze, cut, freeze. So those are some of the things going into some of the larger sort of trends that are affecting how this budget comes together. And then I put a summary together here of some of the budget changes, which is I think what people are interested in seeing is not just sort of the dollar amount change year to year, but what happened and what has changed. And this isn't necessarily comprehensive yet. I'm sure that there's some things I've missed, and actually I'll verbalize one of the things when we get there that I did realize I missed, which is important. But for special education, there was a deep review of all the staffing levels to compare the IEP service mandates and the overall enrollment reduction. So the staffing was not just compared against student IEP needs, but also for example, there are student to staff ratios that are issued by the Mass Department of Health. Professional societies like the American OT Association put out recommended staffing levels. So all of those were sort of used as benchmarking for our staffing levels in special education as well. And those were all looked at carefully and scrutinized. The other thing that happened is, and this is apparently a multi-year activity, previously, the BEEP costs for educators who were in the inclusive classrooms were getting funded from the revolving fund, when really they were, because they are special education and low income students, which make up about 40% of the total BEEP population, those should be funded from the operating budget, those staff. And so those costs were moved from the revolving fund to the operating fund. And my understanding is this has been a multi-year discussion and is now coming into fruition. A third thing that's been changed is adding 8 social workers, one of which is focused specifically on the Steps to Success program, and one which is focused on the LGBTQIA population at the high school. So this significantly increases, it more than doubles the number of social workers total in the district. And then adding a director of SEL to oversee the social workers. So that's the personnel in special education. In Gen Ed, some of the changes that happened, there was the decommissioning of the RLA that Jim talked about earlier. So this is an 82 FTE reduction. And then going back to the in-building sort of more typical model that we have had, reviewing the classrooms against potential enrollment. And so there was a reduction from 270 pre-pandemic classrooms to 262, which is a reduction of 8 classroom FTEs, but there's another approximately 4 other FTEs associated with that. Fractions of art, world language, PE, and so forth. At the high school, there was an additional 5 FTEs identified that could be reduced without impacting education. And then also looking at all of the programs that that are, for example, literacy coaches, literacy specialists, math specialists, looking at all of these. So for example, the literacy coach program has been slightly reduced, but the literacy specialist has been maintained. And what it's important to note too, that is maintaining it because actually there were 2 literacy specialists who were on a Title I, I think it is, grant, which was reduced this year. And so 2 of those FTEs have actually moved to the operating budget. So while the staffing is maintained, the actual cost of the district is actually an additional 2 FTEs there. ECS has been partially returned. And the vision is to have one staff member staying in place to enable small scale piloting. Jim, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yes, I met with the ECS teachers. I'm actually going to be visiting them in their classes, and we're talking about the concept of project-based learning, which is sound, and we don't want to lose. And yet the program itself needs to have some redefinition. And yet, if we put it on pause and remove it entirely, the likelihood of it returning to the budget is difficult. It's difficult to add things to the budget. But if we leave some piece in, and there are a couple of principals who are enthusiastic about a pilot and using sort of the expertise tying directly to curriculum and tying with the guidance from the principal and working directly with the teachers so that all students have the opportunity to be involved with a project tied to the subject. And we want to flesh that out, see what that looks like, and then see how we can bring that to scale and what does that mean? Because what's the actual impact on all students for the value added? And that's going to take a little work. But while we're trying to, quote, reimagine what that program might look like, it needs to be alive and in the schools, or it'll be gone. That's why it's there.
Thank you. And then last on that list is the ELE program. As everyone knows, there's been fewer international students this year, and that's projected to continue for at least another year. And so there's been some realignment of staffing there, while still continuing to maintain the highly supportive structure that has been provided. Other personnel, there's been 2.5 custodial staff FTEs, and this has to do with the increase in square footage at the high school. A payroll budget analyst has been added. This is in part response to the BFAC recommendations of this past year. And then the director of professional development position has been discontinued. So those are some of the other changes. And then, so that's all the personnel. The one thing that I don't think is here represented, but I want to make sure that we note it, is that the funding requested for the summer program is also included in the personnel budget. Let me see. Non-personnel expenses. So there's about 14.1 million in services. And nearly, actually, it's just over 2/3 of that is for the out-of-district tuition and transportation. And then the rest of the breakdown of the other so there's 400 for other special education therapy services, and then another 3.4, which is broken down, as you can see. 1.5 million for software, 950,000 for professional services. One of the things, as Mary Ellen mentioned, we did was we went through all of the different services very closely and looked at what could be, what should be better allocated into different service buckets, rather than using the general consulting services, to use some of the more specific program lines, and also to see where there is not necessarily a need for that funding and how we could reduce the budget to bring it to just the expenses that we are planning for. So that was done. Cleaning services, that cost has also gone up significantly this year. And we want to make sure that the additional cost, though, is just to maintain the current level of service. So that reflects, that 700,000 reflects those costs. And then, as you can see, 100,000 for equipment repair and maintenance. That's a combination of educational equipment, office equipment, so on. And then 225,000 for other contracted services that you can see. Supplies. The supplies, this is something we've talked a lot about, how the supplies were cut drastically, and then the budgets have been frozen. It's been difficult to fund the different curriculum activities. So the supplies have been returned to just over 2.5 million, which is an increase almost exactly of what we had returned, the funding that's been lost in previous years, and we had increased it by, I think, 767, and that's almost exactly what it stayed at. And so the in-building supplies is about 82%. I want to remind you all, and I can bring it up again if needed, but I have gone through this big exercise with the curriculum coordinators, and I had shown you all the K-8 coordinators really sort of documenting at every single grade level what was needed for their supplies, and similar activity happened at the high school. We also were able to bring in some of the additional funding. If you recall, in the 2018 override, there was a request for building supplies, which had been shorted over the past couple of years. And so some of that, not all of that request, was able to be built in again here. And then finally in supplies, just like in BEEP, we moved 40% of the educators in the inclusive classrooms over. We moved to account for the special education and low income students who participate. We did a similar thing for the supplies for BEEP. So that's been moved into the operating expenses. So that's 2.1 million is these curriculum and building supplies. And then the balance is cleaning supplies, which has also increased, and special program supplies, so special education materials, other adaptive materials. And then equipment, the costs, it's about 1.2 million, and it's almost entirely for ongoing lease costs. And then there's another portion of it for projector replacement, which I'm sure several of you, at least Susan and David, know about the ongoing issues with making sure that the projectors are being replaced for the ones that are reaching the end of their lifetime. And we had some good conversations in the middle of this. We've had some good conversations with Scott and with Fung, Scott Moore, who's the director of EdTech, and Fung Yang, about refreshing the district's technology plan, because that was developed for the 2015 override. So how we make sure that that gets re-envisioned for the next few years, and how we make sure that we have the funding in place and the vision of what exactly needs to be covered, so that we have the funding in place, because so much of the buildings now is really moving. If they weren't already, they're pretty fully teched up, I'm going to use that phrase, and how we make sure that we have the replacement and repair costs in place for those refreshes as needed. So that's what I have. This was how I was thinking about it. It was helpful for me to understand the different bins and where things have changed. I don't know if there's discussion, Helen?
Well, I don't know if you want to go to the committee first, but I have I have 3 questions.
Go ahead.
So my first question actually is to Mary Ellen. Have we incorporated any of the savings from retirements into this budget?
Not yet.
Okay,
Typically, we don't do that as we're doing the budget. We do a turnover savings or salary savings of roughly about 675,000.
yeah, that's
um,
what I meant. Is that?
Yeah, so we've not included that yet because we have so much staff kind of moving around.
Right,
And we haven't had retirements coming in yet, but that's on our last item to review that and what will our turnover actually be. And so we're talking about, do we keep it at 675? Do we lower it to 500? So that will be one of the adjustments we'll likely make before Thursday night.
okay. Great. Second question. Why would, I'm not clear why we would have a director of SEL when we have Maria Latas, who's the director of guidance, and wouldn't they be able to also, wouldn't she be able to also supervise the social workers?
Jim, do you want to speak to that?
Yep. We've had that discussion in terms
I
of.
figured you did, that's why I wanted.
Yeah, no, we've had
understand.
that discussion in terms of the work of the guidance department, and the work of these social workers is different. And Maria does handle all the guidance, and she is quite busy right now, flat out against it. And for her to be able to pick up the social workers coming in new, we didn't think that would allow us to get the kind of efficiency that we need in that area. So we want someone who's skilled with social work and focus on that. But that is a good question, though, Helen. It's one that we keep discussing, but we need somebody to coordinate that. Yeah.
Can I add just a smidge to that? There was also the discussion that credentialing, like social work and guidance are different credentialing paths.
I'm
And
a
so-
social worker, so I know.
Oh, good, right. So that was one of the things that.
Yeah, they're different, but that doesn't mean that, these people who we're hiring are credentialed social workers. So they don't necessarily need to be supervised by a social worker. I mean, it would be nice. I think Maria actually is a social worker, if I'm not mistaken. But I may be
There
wrong.
is some overlap, right? Some
Yeah.
of the guidance are social workers,
Right.
or at least have their
No, but I think
certification.
Maria Latas is also a licensed social worker, if I'm not mistaken. Anyways, it just, it seems like for 8 people, adding a director seems.
Well, they're actually existing 8,
7,
6 at the high, 6 more at the high school, and
7
2,
at the high school. I
and
think.
2 they're 8 or 9 already in the
Oh, yeah.
district, so it's really doubling the department. And I would, and there's also, we have a director of guidance or coordinator of guidance at the high school for the high school career
Right.
and guidance. There's no oversight at the elementary level across the 8 schools. So adding another, adding 8 and to the complement we have, just sort of, I'm going to speak for Maria as kind of a tipping point at which your program is now getting big enough that your director of K-12, pre-K-12 director is now stretched, and supervision and evaluation can become a challenge, as well as program continuity.
I'll tell you my fear, because I've seen this happen before. We got a grant for social workers. We got 8 elementary school social workers, and the grant went away and the social workers went away. If we make this a program that's not, that doesn't break the budget, it'll stay. But it mark my words, and I won't be around to see it eventually, but it will be cut, because when it's a choice between cutting a classroom teacher or cutting a social worker, what do you cut? So I would try and see if there are ways to make this program work that are not as, we can also, for social workers, you can have outside, maybe a contracted supervision, maybe make an arrangement with the center, the Brookline Center just having a director adds a layer of cost that I worry about. I'm done with that one.
All right, thank you, Helen.
You're welcome. And the last one is my concern about ECS and cutting it at this point. I think for some kids, this is a really important program that really makes school for them. And I worry we're going to go down to an eighth of one person. Is that the idea? From 8 people.
Well, it doesn't have 8 right now.
There's 8 FTEs, right?
4. No, 4.
4
There were
FTEs.
Only 4 FTEs. It never got out
But it covers
into every
all
single
8
school.
schools. It covers all 8 schools.
Not in 21 and 20, not really. Not consistently.
Yeah, that's part of the issue, is it doesn't cover all schools or all students, and we need to find a way to make that happen, because the tenets of the program in terms of the project-based learning are really solid, but the way the program currently works, it's not reaching all students.
Right.
And
But by
not
cutting
even-
it, it's going to reach less.
Well, we're trying to redesign the program, and redesigning the program is going to take some time and some commitment, and it's going to take both of those. So, and it's going to take energy to look at it and to report out, to bring it to a place where it's going to actually permeate all schools. And so it needs to be reworked. If we take it out entirely, then I think your example about the social workers holds, that it'll never get back in. So trying to maintain the concept and the piece of it so that it can actually be developed and get some the kind of energy that it needs so that it permeates all schools and it addresses all students. That's the goal.
Okay, I'm done. I'm not happy with that one, but, and you know.
That's good. Another good thing, Helen.
Well, Jim, can I follow up a little bit on this one? How many students are currently served with TCS? Do we know the number of students or the percentages of students?
I would actually have to get you that number, which I will get. That's a good question. I'll have that for Thursday night.
Okay, that would be good, because I think I'm probably where Ellen is. I think it's generally, I like the idea of the ECS program. I would want to see it actually fortified and expanded in Brookline. I do think that one of our challenges in the district is how do we offer academically more enriching experiences for students who are ready for it, who want it. So I don't necessarily know whether we have to service all students, but I would want to be able to have the capacity to offer an enriching experience to a lot more students. But I'd like to understand it better. And if you say that the cut could allow and position us to redesign it, then I'd be interested in continuing that conversation.
Okay, well, we clearly need more definition of that when we get to on Thursday.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Just on that
Susan?
one, Mariah.
Yeah, go
Just on
for it.
that one. Yeah, just on that one, there is a lot of history on the program, Dimitri, just to your point, and the curriculum subcommittee, the last time we talked about it, actually advocated increasing the program to 1 FTE per building, because it was sort of the twixt in between. It wasn't quite large enough to get 1 FTE per building to really make sure that all of that coverage was there. But, we didn't want to make it smaller. The curriculum subcommittee advocated for making it larger. And I'm, just full disclosure, I'm a huge advocate for ECS. And so I think part of what I really like about what you said, Jim, was just the notion of like not having it go away entirely, because I couldn't agree more. Once it's gone, we will never get it back. I think maybe what would be helpful is to understand that as it, as a committee, as it transitioned from a gifted and talented program, a pull-out program for a few kids, to become a full classroom program, we understood at a district level, this goes back to Jennifer Fisher-Mueller, so many years back, we understood that to some extent the classroom teachers had to want this and there had to be pull from the classroom teachers. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what we've seen is that has just been inconsistent. Some classroom teachers have found tremendous value and partnerships. And other classroom teachers, it just has not been quite as relevant to them, or they haven't picked it up, or for whatever reason, they just haven't. And so that inequity is not an inequity about like a gifted and talented program. I think it's just really important people understand that it's not a per child equity. It's not like certain children are getting served and not other children. It's that because it was sort of a hearts and minds thing to some extent, there was no mandate across the district for who had to do it, and it was never fully created with its own curriculum, with a set of learning expectations that had to be rolled out across all the grades. What ended up happening again is there were these wonderful flourishings in some places and then just gaps in others. And so what I really appreciate, Jim, about your point is that I think it'll be really, really helpful to just understand what it is that we mean. And it may be worth, Robin, even just pulling some of the notes from that curriculum subcommittee meeting. We spent so much time on this. I don't want to redo it again. There was a whole presentation that Matt Rosenthal did. There was a lot of discussion, and there were a lot of priorities that were set out. And so I just don't want to start from scratch, because I think the overall idea, and again, just full disclosure, I'm a huge advocate for this, but the notion of joyful learning, project-based learning, using different parts of your brain, again, not being a gifted and talented program, but really doing these sort of maker spaces and all that sort of thing. It's just so important. It's really the direction we want to go in, not the direction we want to pull back from. So I guess what I would just ask is that maybe if we can keep thinking about to what extent this is sort of truly a budget problem, and to what extent it's sort of a strategic problem that we want to solve, and kind of what are just different options to do it. But anyway, I think this is definitely more the right direction, Jim. So thank you for that. And maybe we can just kind of continue the conversation to address sort of what Helen and Dimitri were saying. I also know Jennifer's not here, but Jennifer was had strong feelings about this one also. I just want to let folks know that. So I don't know if that's helpful, but that gives a little bit more of the flavor.
Any other comments from people? Andy?
This is just a question about the special education staffing. So in your memo, Mariah, you said that you're trying to align the level of special ed staffing to like current IEP service mandates, and also account for recommendations from expert bodies. So not counting the new social workers that are being added, like what kind of net change in FTEs are we talking about for special education?
It was pretty net neutral. I will say it was actually pretty, it was overall my impression, and I can't tell you exactly like, this, because I just don't have it all in my head. But overall, the impression was that given the special education model that Brookline has employed and mapping that against some of these national benchmarking and state benchmarks, our staffing was pretty close to what we would expect. And so there's like a couple spots where it went up a little bit, a couple spots, but again, putting aside social workers, because that's a whole new category, that generally things mapped pretty closely. And there were some spots where we thought, oh, should it be higher? And they said, nope, this is the right amount of staffing. And some spots, should it be lower? Nope, this is the right amount. Like they, again, it was looking at the benchmarks, and if they weren't hitting it exactly, why, talking through it. And yes, like, because you have to, again, you can't just look at the benchmarks, you have to look at actual student delivery needs. And so overall, it looks like things are pretty much on par for that staffing program.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. Susan?
Just so I understand, so I have a whole list of things. I don't know how many of them you want me to go through.
All of them.
What is all of them?
We're supposed to start at 6. I mean, we're supposed to end at 6:30, but this is the topic of the meeting. So if other people can stay, I am inclined to let it run long. Is there anyone who has a problem with that?
I probably will need to leave by 6:45, but.
Okay. Okay. Go ahead, Susan, then.
Okay, so a couple things. I mean, first of all, this is just such a heroic effort under these circumstances. So just have to say that first, preface any questions with that. I think the first thing that I'm wondering is if we can get an update on where we're landing with the FY21 budget, less in terms of a bottom line number, but more in terms of, there were just a lot of line items that were moving in FY21, and they have a lot of implications for what our starting point is for FY22, if that makes sense. So even things like, the Chromebooks and all the equipment we have in the field. We must have thousands of Chromebooks out in the field and a tremendous amount of equipment, supplies, and whatnot. And so even just sort of understanding what are our assumptions about recouping all those things? Are we assuming we're just going to get all that back magically? Who's running that program? What's going to be the implication if people don't return their stuff? So there's just this trend. There's a really important budget piece that as we land 21 and move into 22, that just some of those things are really important and more important than others. And Chromebooks just came to mind, but I think it's just important to sort of think about what those 2 or 3 sensitivities are. So that will be one thing. The second thing I would ask is, as we think about the ESSER 3 money, just having a sense of what here, both in FY21 and in FY22, would be eligible for ESSER 3, so we understand some of those moving parts, because again, it's fungible, but there are certain requirements around ESSER 3 that are, I think we talked about last time, just some of those criteria about what we would use ESSER 3 funds for. And I think that does affect both 21 and 22. And there might be things that are on our list that are one time that we might not be able to put in, but for ESSER 3 funds, and that will be important. So I'll just give one on my list that I'm particularly keen on. It's not quite ours, but Wi-Fi in public housing for our students who are there. We know that's not a school's sort of cost, but I'm happy to advocate for that. I hope others would be as well, because we know that that's a big driver of inequity. And there are a bunch of other things like that. I don't want to go through all of them, but I think we just need a focused conversation on ESSER 3 and what we might do with that. I think there's sort of a third question, which is part of the first 2, but it's a little bit separate, which is, as we think about bringing down RLA, obviously there'll be a whole lot of bumping. That's going to be pretty complicated to go through. And I think it'll be helpful to understand the order of magnitude, not person by person, although I know Joe is going to have to do that, but understanding the order of magnitude of what is involved in terms of RIFs, and specifically as we think about some of the racial equity pieces to that, get out ahead of those rather than kind of be behind the 8 ball, which we have been in prior years. But understanding not the full cascade, because we know that's probably going to take a while to pull out, but just understand that order of magnitude. How many people are we talking about actually leaving the district, and whatnot? Okay, so I think I have a similar set of questions around special education, but more about compensatory services and sort of what assumptions we're making about that and what information we're using to make those assumptions. Similarly, just on special ed, in the past, this is more of a messaging thing, but in the past, I think there have been families in out-of-district placements who have felt very sensitive about the way the out-of-district placement costs have been positioned. And I think it's probably quite important to check in with at least one of them to make sure that the way we are saying things is not being heard as that the entire budget problems of the district are because of these out-of-district placements or because of these children. And so I think it's one of those things where there was no bad intention on that in the past, but somehow budget messaging around out-of-districts in particular really caused a lot of anguish for some families unintentionally. And I think it's probably a simple fix. It's just important to do. ECS we already covered. And I think the rest of my comments are all focused on just central office, which is understanding for administration and finance. I'm not sure if when we say, more analytic capacity for payroll, like, is that in addition to the payroll person we have? And what about the other BFAC recommendations? There were kind of a whole series of recommendations, many of which were one time and some of which were ongoing analytic capacity. So I just have some questions about ANF, and then just understanding the structure of the Office of Teaching and Learning, like where you're landing on that. I think what I'm hearing is there's a deputy. I think there are still 2 senior directors. I'm not sure, but and I know there's no director of PD, but what are some of the other changes? Because there are a lot of that office has been staffed and reconfigured multiple different ways in terms of who is supervising whom. And so I think it's just important to think through that piece. And then the senior director of educational equity position, having a cabinet level role that's focused on that. I just think it's important to make sure that we have that piece of the conversation as well. So I have a lot of questions underneath all those questions, but let me just sort of stop there and ask, as let me just ask more of a process question than anything else. Like when are we going to have some of those conversations? Not necessarily tonight, but just when are we going to have some of them?
You want to put them in for Thursday, Jim, where Susan can raise them tonight and then we can come back with the time, with the answers and the time
Yeah,
during our budget conversation on Thursday?
Yeah, I've written myself as many notes as I could write down as Susan was talking. But
And this
I'm
is
sorry.
recorded too. This is recorded, so
sorry,
we can go
Jim.
back and
so
rewind the tape.
That's good. But truthfully, Susan, when we do the docket meeting, and we did it this morning, in fact, the question of reduction in force was raised, and David and Suzanne suggested we actually make that an agenda item for a school committee presentation so we can look at that. So I think your questions are right on. I'll make notes of it. I'm going to be following up on a number of them, but particularly the structure at central office and what does that look like? I think that I'll follow up, actually, Susan. I may follow up with you
Sure.
to get more specificity around the questions.
I'm happy to. And I think, there might be thoughts. I know we have a number of advisory committee members on this call who are absorbing, so it would probably be good, if not tonight, if they can send questions in, Mariah, just because
Well, I was
I'm sure.
actually going to call on them
Oh,
next to see, because
Great. All right.
Yep.
So I'll let me stop there, and Jim, happy to connect whatever way is helpful.
Oh, and David has a question too. Go ahead, David.
In terms of one-time costs, do we have a list in mind of what it is that we would like to seek with the funds that we're receiving from the federal government?
So can I interject respectfully, is that we've applied 100% of the ESSER 3 money to our revenue scheme. So we're entering into a conversation where we're about to spend the money twice. So I think
Well, we're not going to spend the money twice. And I think,
but I think the discussion may be, what is the strategy for the use of ESSER 3 in terms of spreading it out over 2 years? Is the school committee okay with applying it 100%? If it's not, then we need either other reductions or other funding source from the town. The internet access for the housing authority, 100% support Susan's comment. And I believe, because I've been looking about where that can get funded, I believe the American Rescue Plan got a line item for something like that, whereas our ESSER 3 money doesn't. So I want to make sure that people understand there's a whole different spot of funds.
That's exactly my point, Mary Ellen. Precisely. No, exactly.
can I say one thing too, Mary Ellen, about what you're saying? I want to reiterate that the budget that we still have a $380,000 gap, and that $380,000 gap is only possible because we are applying all of ESSER 2 and all of ESSER 3 to the upcoming year's budget. And even still, we have a small gap to close here. Now, what this means is, this is my opinion, is Brookline needs to, this budget process from my perspective was very helpful to understand where we are in terms of our staffing. But I also think that it comes down to, we're going to have to make some hard decisions, probably not this year. This is an incredible year of transition, but next year, about what are the programs that are truly differentiated in terms of what they contribute to student outcomes and which ones aren't, and doing that analysis, because we can't carry every single thing. And as Susan said a month or so ago, when you prioritize everything, you prioritize nothing. And so we have to actually look at the programs that are the most important to student success and to teacher effectiveness. And then we have to really invest in those programs. And it probably means letting some other things go, because this is not sustainable. And there is, by using all of these monies this year, we have possibly deferred the cliff a year, maybe, if depending on what happens with ARP, 2 years. I do not think there is a cliff coming, and it's not just Cliff Brown who's turned off his video. There is a financial cliff, and not just financial Cliff Brown, which is coming, and we're going to have to reconcile with that, is the way I'm thinking about it. But there, to David's question, there's no one-time use of these monies. We are doing the wrong thing. But this is the path forward at this time. Cliff, go ahead.
Well, thank you. I want to start by echoing some of the things that Susan said, and really, giving you a standing ovation for the work that you did, because I think it is really very helpful and very informative for everybody. It's the type of analysis, at least a beginning of an analysis that I think some folks have been talking about receiving since 2014 in many respects, being able to like dig deep in some things. So I really, applaud that effort. I don't know how you did it. I don't know if you're going to be able to sustain it, but I really applaud it. And I also want to applaud the comments you just made, because I think it's really important that everyone recognize that it is a very risky game to be using one-time funds to plug operating deficits. Because if you don't make those hard decisions next year, then you've created expectations for people, and the same issue is going to happen on the town side. People are going to have this tendency to want to use these monies, and then it's like, okay, well, what's your revenue path to get you to the point where you can backfill that gap? And kicking a can down the road is never a great thing, because the pain in the future is worse than the pain today. So I applaud. I don't necessarily endorse the approach, but I really applaud the fact that there is full disclosure here and a recognition of the challenges, because I think the school committee as a whole has to really be prepared and start working, if you go this route, on July 1st to address the issues. The one question I had, because it was really unclear to me from the presentation, and I apologize, is whether or not the budget still is looking for money from the town side beyond what was originally proposed in the town school partnership, or have you, through other means, filled that gap?
The number that was proposed with the $380,000 shortfall uses the town school dollar amount as the town allocation and not some other amount.
Okay, so again, just for my own, just like
I'm going to say this again. So the school committee had voted 125, but for this calculation, we're talking about the 120.9 million or whatever it is.
Right. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, great. Thank you. I appreciate it. That's exactly what I was wondering. Thank you.
Right.
Ben, go ahead.
Sure. I want to second what Cliff said. It's been so impressive watching what you guys have done over the last couple of meetings, and particularly tonight. It's not only transparent, it's sane, and as you said earlier, which I think was very important, it has its eye on the future, and in the sense that not everything can be a priority. I was wondering whether you have any idea about when the American Rescue Plan data is going to come in for the town and for the schools. Has anybody given you a date at this point?
Mary Ellen?
No, the only thing I know is Melissa Goff is probably attending her 11th, going on 12th presentation on it with the League of Cities, I think, or she's been to any number of different presentations about sort of how the funds can be used, when they're going to know what the timing is. So I'm equally watching that timetable myself, because I imagine that's 3-year funding, and it's got that one little tagline about revenue, replacing revenue, and the economics of the community, and that's important. So TBD.
Okay, thank you.
Chi-Chi?
Hi, Mariah. So I also wanted to echo, this is a very impressive presentation, and that this and some of the other work you've done on modeling is really valuable and helpful. So thank you. I had a couple of questions originally on what you presented, and then actually a question based upon what Cliff, both you and Cliff mentioned about this structural gap. So maybe I'll start with the structural gap. So, my understanding is that these one-time funds on a global level, they're to supplement the budget where there are additional needs because of the COVID pandemic, and they're also to make up gaps in shortfalls in state and local revenue due to the pandemic. And looking back at the difference between FY 20, which was mostly before the pandemic, and local receipts, and then what's projected for FY 22, it seems that there's about a $10 million difference, a $10 million decrease. And so, using a very back of the envelope calculation of the town school partnership distribution, wouldn't that be a $5 or $6 million shortfall for the schools in terms of money? So how much of this is actually structural, and how much of this is due to shortfalls in local revenue because of COVID? And then my other two questions had to do with your presentation, Mariah, about, I want to know more about the reduction in ELL. And, my concern being that once we do start seeing more international students, whether if we're reducing ELL staff now, we're going to have an issue about bringing it back up when we are back to normal, whatever that means in terms of international students. And then, on the social workers, if we're hiring 7 or 8 more social workers, has there been any attention paid to making sure that, 1 or more of them can specifically serve the Asian American community, given that, you've now had a social workers specifically serving the LGBTQIA community and other communities. I know there's one social worker at BHS who is of AAPI background, and hopefully would have some culturally competent skills there, but it's really needed at the elementary school level too.
So I just want to be sensitive on the time too. So I'm going to try and answer a little bit quickly, and then hopefully we can wrap up so that we're just as far as the ELEs, my understanding is, and Mary Ellen, you should correct me, that the reduction is, sorry, I've got an angry 4-year-old who needs to eat dinner too on my lap. Mary Ellen, how much was the reduction in ELE that was proposed? Do you remember the FTE?
It's like one or two. It's not more than 2 FTEs.
Yeah, I thought it was around a small, like a one,
Yeah.
right around 1, maybe a little bit more. And with the idea that, again, it's responding to the expected need for the next year. And so we would be staffing appropriately to the need for the next year. Sorry. And I'm sorry, what were your other questions? Oh, one was about the social workers and how they're going to be allocated. I know that Casey has been thinking about that. Also, she mentioned specifically thinking about, for example, bilingual competencies as well in the population. And so she has a lot of those sorts of thoughts going on in her mind. And I'm sure, I don't want to speak for Jim, but I imagine, talking to her, continuing to talk to her, and through the ELPAC, making sure that there's those connections made. And also through BaFin, obviously talking to her as well. Is that accurate, Jim, to think about reaching out to
is
Casey
accurate. That's, in fact, that was discussed today as well in terms of hiring the social workers that it can really be used to address the diversity we have here. And so she's aware of that. And, Casey, she's on it. Kind of thing. And I agree with Mariah's comments in terms of staffing for the needs that you have in front of you at the time. And that's always, a question with principals saying the enrollment's going to go up. We need more teachers. Well, we can only staff for the numbers that we have. And the similar thing was in ELL. And Mindy's been involved with that going forward. It's funny how you have to be aware and to think future and live in the present. It's a challenge.
Yeah, and it's been informed by the expectation that of what's going on in the pandemic and sort of expectation for fall. And
yeah.
And then you had a third question. I'm sorry, Chi-Chi, and I can't remember what it was.
You know what? It was more of a point than a question. So I know that we're, the structural
deficit. Yes.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Just a point.
The answer to that is yes. And that's where the American Rescue Plan is a relief. Because if you actually divide that by 3, it actually equates to the $11 million deficit projected gap that we had when we started the process with the town school partnership. So if you go back to the first meeting of the town school partnership for this year, back in October, November, when we met, you'll see that structural gap due to the economics for this year. And that, so we can talk more about that offline. I'm happy to talk to you about that or walk you through that, what that looks like for schools and town. And I'm sure Melissa would do the same.
Yeah, I guess it was more of a point than a question that some of this deficit is not inherently structural, but it's due to the pandemic and the decrease in local receipts.
That's a good point.
Yes.
Okay, so it's 6:48. Dimitri had to go at 6:45. I think everyone probably needs to eat dinner and all of those good things. So I'm going to thank everyone. And we have school committee on Thursday. Any other questions related to budget? I'd ask the people email them to Jim, Mary Ellen. Who do you want the questions to go to? So make sure that we get the answers.
If you go to Mary Ellen, she's going to be attuned to it. So and focus. Okay. So send them to Mary Ellen.
And then we have the next meeting, our next school committee meeting and the advisory committee meeting the week after that. So we'll make sure to connect so that we get everything. Cliff, the same thing if you all can get questions to us too, to make sure that we have those.
Sure thing.
Okay, thank you. Have a good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.